Welcome, everyone. My name is Gladys Rama. I'm the editorial director here, and I am so pleased to welcome you to our Threat Monitoring for SMBs and Enterprises Summit. This one has been brought to you by Control Up, Druva, and Rubric. The editorial staff of Redmond Mag have worked really hard to bring together some of the best independent experts on this topic, so we hope that you sit tight for the entire event and that you enjoy it. Before we start, we do have 3 sessions today, but before we do get started, a couple of announcements. First, this event is being recorded and it'll be available for future viewing. Second, each of these sessions will have some time in them for Q&A. So as your questions occur to you, please be sure to put them into your console, and our experts are going to try to get to as many of them as they can during the time that they have. Third, after our 3rd session today, we are giving away an Xbox Series X console, but you have to be present for the entire event to win, so do stay on until the end. And finally, we have resources from our sponsors, Control Up, Druva, and Rubric, that are available to you in the console right now to check out. So go ahead and download them, read them. It's because of our sponsors underwriting this content that we can bring you this summit. So we thank them for supporting today and supporting the community, and we ask you to check out those resources so we can bring you more events like this in the future. Now on to our first session. It's a good one. It's called Detect Early and Detect Often, the case for threat monitoring. And it's going to be presented by frequent speakers here, John O'Neill Sr. and Dave Kawula. John has been in the IT industry for over 30 years. He's been everything from a software architect to a senior executive to a consultant to an author. And he's been involved in everything from multinational networking, messaging, and communications to ERP and security operations. John is a 4-time recipient of Microsoft's MVP Award, including an MVP in security, and has developed technology training courseware and written numerous books and articles. Dave is a Microsoft MVP with more than 20 years of experience in the IT industry. He's a leading technology expert for both local customers and large international enterprises, and his background includes data communications networks within multi-server environments and has led architecture teams for virtualization, System Center, Exchange, Active Directory, and Internet gateways. These guys are frequent speakers here, and they're always great presenters, so I hope you enjoy. John and Dave, the floor is now yours.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for the warm introduction. And you know what, John, I'm thinking about something with my now over 20 to 30 years IT. I think I'm just going to start walking backwards. So every year, next year will be 19 years of experience, and 18 years, I'll just go backwards with all of this. That way I don't have to be the old guy in the room like you.
Just so you know, between the two of us, we have over 70 years. So how's that for old?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Well, you know what? It's always a pleasure to be able to do these sessions with yourself, John, as we come into the weekend on a great Friday. It's summertime, and this is an absolutely fantastic topic about early monitoring and detection and threat monitoring. This is so relevant today because the attack surface and the landscape just keeps changing. And just a couple housekeeping notes for all of our wonderful attendees before we get started. John and I love to make these sessions as absolutely interactive as possible. So in your panel that you've got for the webinar and the session right now, there's an option in there to post questions. So if you've got any burning questions that you'd like us to get to through the webinar, we will get to absolutely as many as possible. And with that, John, I guess we will take it away with the session. So our kind of outline that we've got for today, we're going to talk about the importance of threat monitoring and some of the tools that are going to be required to do this on a daily basis. We've already got some great questions coming in. And with that, John, I'll just hand it over to you real quick for an introduction to the session, and then we'll get going with the content.
Thanks a lot, Dave. It's great to be back with you. I love this. I love how we get a chance to get together and discuss these relevant topics with our peers in the industry and fellow IT pros and business professionals, so it's great. As you mentioned, we're really going to jump right in and get into the importance of threat monitoring. And, a lot of IT pros, when we talk about this, they're like, okay, well, we know that. But I always like to go into a little bit of detail on this, because when you're going for the budget, when you're trying to convince the C-suite and other business unit leaders that you really need to invest in this, or you have to put different priorities on it, or that kind of thing, it's good to have some data in your back pocket, right? They love to hear that data. So, go ahead, Dave.
No, John, I was just going to mention in regards to the budget. Listen, here's the thing is that, if we were talking 5-6 years ago, I found that it was a little tough to convince the C-suite of the reasons to spend money on cybersecurity. And now they just see all of their upstream business partners and the neighbors next door and potentially the hospital down the street getting hit. And I find that discussion is a lot more welcoming than what we had 5 years ago.
Most definitely, Dave. And, now the conversation seems to be more about where to make the investment and getting organizations to, shift some of that investment from simply reactive side to proactive side. And that's where threat monitoring really comes in, right?
Oh, absolutely, John. And so when we take a look at, the whole point of the session that we're in is, effective monitoring solutions put in place to take and detect when the threat actors and the bad guys are coming in. One thing that we have to remember is that from a cybersecurity standpoint, the bad guys don't sleep. They're going to be working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year to try to find ways to get into our infrastructure. And so one of the issues that we find, and this is actually a great segue to a question that just came in, John, and it's how can SMBs with limited resources effectively implement and maintain threat monitoring systems? And I know exactly where this is coming from. In the IT world for these smaller organizations, there's typically one, maybe two individuals that are tasked with being the desktop support technician, the server person, now the cloud person, now the security person. And we have to now wear all of these different hats, right? And so what can an individual like that do to help look at this plethora of alerts that might be coming in now from the alerting system? So let's just take and do a little bit of role playing here, John. We now work with an organization. We now implement the greatest security threat monitoring solution out there in the industry. And instantly, the dashboard lights up with all of these alerts. And how do we work through that? How do we, maintain? How do we manage that?
Well, so, this is a great point for those small and medium businesses. First, it goes to that old, kind of euphemism of how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So don't lose yourself in, oh my God, we've had an event. What do I do? I don't have the money for this. I can't do this. I don't know who to alert or whatever. Calm down. You'll make it through. And what you can do is first and foremost, and you can do this proactively also, is rely on your network. You have a network of professionals that are out there. I mean, Dave, you and I are part of that network, right? We spend a lot of time each week answering questions from people who hit us up on Twitter or send us an email and say, hey, I've got this kind of situation, and where do you think I should make investment, or how should I make investment, or what should I do, and go on from there. But that's first and foremost, rely on your network. Second off, minimize the damage, right? Dave, you've heard me say this during some of our in-person sessions, and that is, the first thing you do if a chipmunk gets in your house is shut all the doors. Otherwise, you just chase them from room to room to room to room, right? contain it in a room. So when you have a cyber event and you've identified it or whatever, drop everything. I don't care if that means walking up and pulling the plug out of the wall, but as soon as you can, just drop everything. Drop your internet connection, your firewall, your network, whatever. It's better that everybody be down for 15, 20 minutes than it is for you to spend time, trying to make sure that it's a real event and let the infection spread, right? We want to isolate and then investigate. And so those are my top two. Dave, how about you?
Like for me, John, I think the big one is going to be taking, and this actually just came in with one of the questions, and I was going to lead into this, is for these smaller organizations, the power of AI is your friend when it comes to cybersecurity. We can't possibly know everything. With like the learning curve just to get up to speed from a cybersecurity perspective is huge, especially if this isn't your, primary job role or function. Maybe you were just thrust into having to look after this. Leverage AI. Microsoft's made huge investments into security and Copilot. And I've set this up at a number of customers and, just going through and digging in for root cause analysis, threat hunting, having that best friend that you can just ask those questions to weed through to see if this is a serious or a threat or alert is huge. And that's probably my top one. So now the next thing is, John, leading into a little bit of statistics. I know that you are a very big numbers person and statistics person. And some of the ones in here really took and jumped out at me. And so the surge in ransomware attacks of 93% up since in 93% surge in 2022. A lot of that came with the COVID-19 global pandemic. An estimated percentage of 57% of organizations worldwide experiencing some type of ransomware incident. And this is an interesting one to me, John, because there are now reporting standards for a lot of industries where if you do have a cyber incident, you have a mandate to report, but I still find that a lot don't. And the other big one in here for me is the average cost of breach is very interesting, these statistics. So from your perspective, John, like when we look at, a breach, an event, something like that happening, this leads into, the importance for taking and being proactive with your monitoring to make sure that, you're going to take and you're going to have the appropriate measures put in place. Now, the last thing I'll finish with here on this piece, John, and I'll hand it back to you, is just having the monitoring solution is not enough, all right? We are looking at infrastructure in a lot of these organizations that has been built and put in place. Let's just look at the life cycle of Active Directory, John. When the year 2000 is when Active Directory came out with Windows Server 2000. And so a lot of these organizations have had directory services in place for now almost 25 years. And there's a lot of skeletons that are sitting in the closet because the person that built that probably isn't around anymore, probably don't understand what a lot of those security policies are that are in place right now. And so our goal, and everyone listening to this webinar, is you have to look at your infrastructure holistically, and you have to look at ways that you can harden this one piece at a time, right? And so that's a big one for me. So John, what do you think about some of your statistics here?
Well, the two that I really, give me a lot of lost sleep and a lot of pause to think about are, first off, just like you, it's the money and, of course, the per incident cost. But look at the data that shows the estimated total cost of cybercrime, right? 2015, so 9 years ago, it was $3 trillion, which we thought was crazy. I remember talking about it like, that's a crazy number. Well, in just 1 year from now, it's expected to be $10.5 trillion. That's crazy numbers. I mean, that's more than the gross domestic product of a number of countries. It's just insane. And then the APTs, the advanced persistent threats, right? Really, in February 2022, when Russia launched their attack against Ukraine and targeted their power grid and their water treatment and all their other infrastructure, the era of cyber warfare was born. I mean, I know we had some events before that, obviously, but now we're right in the thick of it, and we have all this nation-state sponsored attacks that are coming at us, and particularly in the U.S. here, there are a number of countries out there that really would like to disrupt our supply chain, our infrastructure, all sorts of things. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of those things aren't really robust. They're built on old technologies. They don't have a lot of protection. Point in fact, the city of Cleveland, Ohio, is currently shut down. They've been shut down all week related to a cyber incident. So they are not offering services to customers. You can't go to City Hall and get stuff done. Shut down from a cyber incident. So, this stuff is starting to disrupt our daily lives on a much bigger scale.
No, absolutely, John. Absolutely. Let's take a look at some of the actual techniques that the threat actors are kind of currently using here today, and why it's so important for taking and having monitoring solutions in place. And just so everyone knows, and just to be very clear on this, if you're in an organization right now and your only defense against the bad guys, the threat actors, is an antivirus solution, you need to take and you need to up your game today. You need to make sure that you've got an advanced threat protection and monitoring solution that is going to go well beyond just antivirus. And so this is going to have, connections to the cloud. This is going to take, and this is going to be able to detect those threats. You're going to be able to block and do segmentation and isolation from, a cloud-based panel. So if something does happen, you have the ability to immediately isolate machines, collect investigation packages, do things like this. Many great vendors out there, but antivirus is not enough anymore. It's not stopping the real threats that are out there. And so that threat monitoring comes as part of those advanced threat protection solutions that are available in the industry today. And so, like, the big ones that everyone loses sleep over, John, is, ransomware. Well, what's going to happen? We're going to get a note left on our desktop, and, somebody's going to take and they're going to try to extort us for money in a variety of forms. They're going to encrypt our files. They're going to take and they're going to steal our data. They're going to offer it up for sale on the black market. One of the big pieces inside of here that's really game-changing is the sophistication around these organizations and the level and measure of attacks that they have. And so the big thing that a lot of individuals that I talk to still think about with especially a ransomware attack, John, is that, oh no, I clicked on a phishing email and that phishing email took me to a bad site. And that bad site had me download something, and that's how it got into the network. And that's actually could possibly happen, but the new way of doing this is the sale of credentials and the harvesting of credentials through a top tier prior to the ransomware attack, where you're going to take and have what are called access brokers that sell credentials on the black market. So there'll be some type of breach. And so before they even go in and do any type of work in your infrastructure, they might make just as much money selling those credentials that they've just been able to harvest on the dark web to individuals that want to use this for nefarious purposes. Could be government, state agencies, and government threat actors that are buying these things to try to get into critical infrastructure. And so now, without even having to deliver the attack, they're getting paid. All right. And that's really important to understand, because at the end of the day, a lot of this is a money game. And so now you need to tell me that I can take and make money at this without ever having to lay a finger inside of that infrastructure to do physical damage. Somebody else can go do all of that. I can basically just harvest those credentials and put those up for sale and get my cut. It's a lot easier to do that than to have to go deal with somebody actually taking and paying you money. They're auctioning off credentials like that, John. And so that's really huge when you take a look at that part of sophistication behind what's actually going on. All right, over to you, John.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. And, a lot of those people that are stealing credentials, they're just subscribing to ransomware as a service, collecting the credentials and selling them. They're not sophisticated hackers with, great development skills where they are creating, software exploits or taking advantage of software exploits. No, they're just paying somebody for a toolkit, getting in, using it, harvesting credentials, selling them for fractions of a penny a piece, and moving on. And, at scale, they're making a lot of money doing it. So, let's talk about a few of the recent high-profile cyber attacks. And I wanted to pick some here that, they're recent, but not super recent, because I wanted stuff that all of our attendees probably have heard of and heard some detail and background of. So, we have the Colonial Pipeline. And this is huge because when we talk about interrupting daily lives of people, you shut down gas, fuel that people use for their cars and everything else, and you've got a real problem. And, even though it didn't cause us to not be able to fuel our cars or that sort of thing in large scale, it did spike fuel prices completely across the East Coast. I mean, even here in Ohio. And that was a big one. The JBS meat processor, right? So another one. Imagine if, there's a supply chain problem and now you go to your local market or butcher shop and they just don't have meat for sale. I mean, these are ways to really start messing with people's daily lives, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely, John. And, we actually just had one up here in Canada, in Western Canada, where I live, recently. So we have a drugstore chain very similar to like a CVS or Walgreens in the U.S. called London Drugs, very publicly shut down all of the stores for weeks on end. And you weren't able to go get your drugs. You weren't able to go get your prescriptions. You weren't able to go in there and do any shopping. Completely shut down the organization. Now, you think about that. For most organizations, John, what's the runway that a lot of these companies have for a complete wholesale shutdown for weeks on end, no revenue, lost supply chain, lost customers? I'm telling you, like a lot of organizations, that's where, they don't report the breaches, John, because they're just out of business. They're not around anymore. And that's another statistic. How many customers, John, get hit by ransomware and just go away because they have no capabilities of recovering from that? And it's actually a very staggering number when you think about it.
Absolutely, right. And that's where we get into the risk of, people self-insuring. They think they can ride the wave through, and by the time they realize they're wrong, it's too late.
All right, so let's take a look at some of the things that we're going to take and we're going to monitor against here, John, because I think level setting with that, we talked about some statistics here. We've talked about some case studies. Let's talk about some of the common threats that are out there. And probably one of the most common one that's out there that we've faced for, the better part of my professional IT career is just malware. And so, the first piece of malware that I remember was actually on a set of floppy disks for installers. There was malware that was inside of those floppy disks. I'm dating myself. But this has gone back, as long as I've had my career. And so what's the purpose of malware? Malware is designed to take and masquerade itself. It's designed to take and infiltrate into organizations. And right now, today, the big thing for me with malware is the harvesting of credentials and the ability to take and give access to threat actors into organizations. How do you protect against modern forms of malware? Couple things. You have advanced threat protection solutions, so you can monitor, you can isolate, you can shut this stuff down. The second thing is that inherently, if you're a Windows shop, there are built-in threat protection solutions with Microsoft Defender, but they need to be fully engaged. So by default, what I like to tell everybody is that your antivirus solution that came with Windows Defender, is like in home edition version, where you're getting some lightweight monitoring, some lightweight protection out of box. You, as an IT pro and administrator, need to configure it so that it's in full guard enterprise mode to block against this stuff. Is that a good way to put that, John?
That's a great way to put that, Dave. I totally agree.
And so what you need to do is you need to make sure that you're actually configuring the systems to ensure that you're actually fully blocking against this stuff. And so when, typical threats that would come up, like, for example, a lot of malware might hide inside of bad VB code that's inside of Excel spreadsheets, those good old macros that you use. Well, guess what? There's solutions that are in place to harden your systems to block that type of VB code from doing things like reaching out to the internet. Why does that code ever need to reach out to the internet? Let's block it, right? And so you have to really dig into those pieces as you go through. All right, so the next one, John, phishing. So I'll give you phishing here.
Well, and Dave, I really want to mention, because it's even the same thing here when we talk about threat monitoring, another one, in addition to those VB scripts and Java scripts and that sort of thing, how about all those programs that we have that the developer says, oh, you have to run it as admin, right?
Right.
No, you don't have to run it as admin. And there are tools out there that you can use to determine exactly what it needs when it's running and then alter it. But it takes a lot of work and a lot of time when the developer won't do it for you or the developer is not available. So keep that in mind. And, phishing, everybody hears about phishing, and their insurance companies and their auditors are making them, run simulations and try and train their users and everything else. Problem is what we're seeing, Dave, in the field is that users are kind of getting phishing training fatigue. So they know what to do to pass the training, but then they don't implement it in their real lives. They still get an email and they still click the link in it. So, that doesn't mean you can stop doing the training, but you need to find new ways to deliver the message, new ways to engage the users in your organization. And, leadership, in my opinion, really needs to be engaged to support the effort and to support having accountability. If you've got a user who has, failed the phishing simulation 3 times, there needs to be some accountability rather than just hoping that it works itself out. Particularly in spear phishing, where, somebody's targeting directly somebody with a high level of access. Maybe it's a production manager out on the plant floor where they can disrupt your operations, or the warehouse shipping manager, that sort of thing. So, I'm not going to go too far into phishing. Everybody knows what it is, but I will say that. And then we'll jump into ransomware. And Dave, you've really gone into this already, so I'm just going to let you close it out in case you have some extra thoughts on ransomware.
Yeah, so the big thing with ransomware right now is we need to make sure that we are taking and having a what I call measure of recoverability. Okay, this is a conversation that you have to have with your business leaders that you have inside of your organizations. And so what we say with this is, okay, we have backups. Okay. And so those backups that we have, are those backups in a protected place so that if we have an event where we lose administrative level access in our primary domain, are they still available to us? Are they still viable? We like to use the words immutable backups, okay? But I like to take this one step further. And so what we what we do, John, is we create what I call SADA network, or SADA, a secure and disaster attested network. Basically what it is it's a separate Active Directory domain and forest. We used to call it a fabric, but Microsoft's come up with their own word for a fabric, so now we call it a SADA. And so what we do with that is that's where we're going to put all of our backup data, John. That's where we're going to put all of the things that we need to be able to recover the organization. Because what we have to think of is the city of Cleveland. City of Cleveland is 100% shut down right now. They have no capacity to take and bring systems back online. If they did, they would have done it a week ago. They haven't done it yet. They're still down. And so with a secure and disaster attested network, we have what's called a measure of recoverability. And that measure of recoverability is we have all of the critical systems that we have all backed up or have replicas of that infrastructure. And we have the ability to press the big red button and say, we need to bring these systems back online. What's out there right now might be infected. We might not know where that came from. So we might have to actually just start over greenfield, but we have the ability to start over greenfield. If you do not have a secure and disaster attested network in your infrastructure and you lose admin credentials, it is game over. What we do is we give you a second set of admin credentials that are highly guarded. Think of like the nuclear football that the government of the United States has, and they split those codes up. So there's half of the password here and half of the password here to actually get into it. Think of an environment like that you're building, so that you have a measure of recoverability. Because in all honesty, for your organization today, it's not a matter of if you're going to get hit, is when you're going to get hit and how hard you are going to be hit. And do you have a measure of recoverability? So that's where I'll leave that piece.
Well, and you and I have proven out the value and the nature of the SADA and the RDSN, right? Our rapidly deployable secure network that allows us to recovering those things on the SADA to put them on a network that we know is secure and unaffected, so that, we've proven that we can start to restore operations literally in minutes after we've identified an event.
Yeah, absolutely, John. Absolutely. The next case for threat monitoring, this is the one that keeps me up at night, even more than ransomware, John, because going back a few years, we defended against organized crime, all right? Organized cyber crime was what we were really defending against for, our commercial business operations. The state-sponsored stuff that was out there was kind of left government to government. So governments would try to hack governments, and there was kind of an unwritten rule that they would maybe just leave it at that, and they wouldn't really cross that boundary. I tell you, John, this conflict in the Ukraine has changed the game. State-sponsored attacks are, those are the scary ones, because those are the ones that organizations might not even care about getting some type of financial remuneration back from your organization. Their entire goal is chaos. They just want to disrupt. So, John, what are some thoughts that you have on these modern threat actors that are out there?
Well, and I'm with you, Dave. This is the one that causes me the most lost sleep, because we used to think, like, at first when we would talk about this, people would think that, oh, they won't target me. They're just going to target, like you said, government to government and that sort of thing. No. Not only do they know from the efforts that they've taken, such as with the Ukraine power grid and other things, but they know the effects of a disruption from what COVID did to the supply chain. So they know if they can interrupt, like meat processing or fuel delivery or those kind of things, they can seriously impact not only daily lives, but the economy of an entire country, which then, a country the size of the U.S., that's going to bleed into other countries and everything else. So the likelihood that an attack from Iran or North Korea, Russia, any of these places could breach and cause us disruption, I believe, is very high, extremely high. And as we see with the city of Cleveland and other government agencies being affected, I don't think that they're necessarily taking the right level of investment into protecting themselves. So that's my thoughts on APTs. And, insider threats. Dave, if you don't mind, I'm just going to handle this one because my big point here with insider threats is that you need to realize that they're still happening. And they are actually one of the most effective ways for an attack to work because they're already inside a lot of your defenses. And this doesn't mean be paranoid about everybody you work with. You should trust everybody you work with and your coworkers and that sort of thing. But you should also be on the alert for outliers. And you should have appropriate prevention mechanisms and reaction mechanisms in place. Everything from employee training and of course, you have incident response plans for other types of cyber incidents. You need them for insider threats also. And whistleblower policies, right? This is a type of, if you were looking at, the NIST framework, this would be in that defend area because somebody calling and feeling safe to report something is an important defense mechanism against insider threats. Financial losses. These are huge, right, Dave? I mean, we can't imagine. I'll throw this at you because I know you have some great examples of costs impacting companies. You got into it a little bit earlier.
Yeah. So I was brought in and actually just so for everyone listening, and we have some great questions that have come in. Thank you everyone for posting those questions. We'll get to those in just a second after this particular slide. We got a couple questions that we'll hit up. So thank you for posting those. We do appreciate that. So John and I have been parts of now, I think it's 12 to 15 ransomware remediation exercises where we've helped organizations try to recover. And so the one that I'll bring up that is top of mind for myself was a couple years ago. It was actually around this time in the summer, John. I got a phone call from a friend of mine that was running an IT organization, and he's like, "Hey, Dave, you got a minute?" And you know that phone call that you get, John, when it is just you can just tell something's wrong just by the tone of somebody's voice. And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, what's buddy? What happened?" And he's like, "We got hit." I'm like, "What do you mean we got hit?" It's like our organization got hit. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, their organization got hit. No, they were actually a managed service provider, and they were part of the Kaseya breach. And the Kaseya breach basically was a supply chain level attack where they got access to the top level consoles, and the agents that were running on all of the systems that were being monitored and managed were running with system level context by default. So there was a little hidden guide that Kaseya had saying, if you want to secure our platform, please don't use our default installer, which installs everything by system. So that's kind of like Kaseya's get out of jail free card, I guess. But that was the end of the day. Was they had system level context to everything. And so that payload got delivered and everything got ransomed. 60 customers got ransomed across the deck, everything. Because they had the agents on everything because they were using it as a management plane, right, as an MSP. Scary stuff, John. The cost of this, though, was very interesting because we had to go through and work through cyber insurance. We had to work through trying to get some of these servers back for some of these customers where they were whole level encrypted. There was no SATA. There was no coming back. They had no ability to take and recover, so they had no choice but to negotiate with the bad guys. So it was a strain of Rebel ransomware was what hit them. And the cost was $40,000, or at the time, 1 Bitcoin per server, or $4 million for the organization. And it was basically just a flat price that they set across the deck. And so luckily, in our case, John, we were actually able to take and for that particular customer that, we were just brought in third party to this. We had never set up any measures to protect them. They didn't have any threat monitoring in place. So, and so anyways, they ended up paying the Bitcoin and they were able to recover one of their backup servers, which is actually very lucky. Normally you can't even recover a backup server, but in this case they were. And we were actually able to restore from there. And so along those lines is a question that came in here as well. And Kevin, thank you very much. This is a great question. This is just a question that was leading into our topic around the secure and disaster tested network. And it's if a malicious actor gets access to an admin level password, what keeps them from changing all other admin level passwords? At this point, I'm leaning towards my ability to restore AD prior to compromise. And so this is the whole point of a separate environment that stores your backups and your infrastructure. Because if you have a flat domain, which is the utopia that we all try to get to, and if they do get admin level access, the first thing they're going to go hunting on your network for is they're going to go hunting for all your backups to try to nuke them to prevent your ability to restore. Because if they can hinder your ability to restore, then it makes it more likely that you're going to have to pay. So you want those backups in a separate environment with a separate set of admin credentials with a very few set of individuals that have access to it, that you're going to have the ability to restore. So that's the measure of recoverability part of that. If you just have a flat domain today, you're living dangerously, because if those admin credentials get compromised, you're talking about being wiped off the face of the earth. And that is why you need that separate environment built out where you store that infrastructure. And it's a two-part question from Kevin, actually, and he's asking about, okay, that's fine. So we do that. What about network segmentation? Do we do that via ACLs or a VLAN level or separation via physical firewalls? How do we actually protect ourselves from inside of that infrastructure? And so one little gold nugget that I'll give you here, Kevin, is that you need to look into the concept of what's called a privileged access workstation. A good friend of mine and cybersecurity, well-known cybersecurity professional around the world, Sami Laiho, likes to say that if you can access Facebook, don't let Facebook take down your company. And what he's meaning by that is if your system that you're on today, that you're using as an admin workstation, can access Facebook, that probably shouldn't be the box that you're using to do your administration from. So you want to set yourself up a privileged access workstation with very limited access to only maybe select Microsoft portals, things like that. And how you can secure this today, Kevin, is with the inability of maybe setting up those ACLs quickly or firewalls. We can actually use IPsec-based policies for those privileged access workstations to talk to the secured environment. Today, that could be set up today to lock that down. And in essence, that can actually hide and masquerade that environment so that the threat actors might not even be able to see it on the network. So we do have ways to do that. Organizations do this today. And it just is a very, very relevant point. And so I really do thank you for that question. There are paths forward to get yourself through that. All right, next one here, John. Where are we at? So financial losses. So our next one, damage to reputation. So I'll let you take this one, John.
Well, this one is very important for organizations to understand, particularly for-profit organizations, because this can probably be, in some cases, the most expensive cost of a cyber incident to your organization. If you're a publicly held organization, it can tank your stock value, and it may never come back. Of course, if you're a huge brand, like the JBS Meat incident that we put up there earlier, that can really hurt you. But I want to talk about kind of a specific case as an example. Let's say you're a manufacturer and you have you're a supplier to the automotive industry, right? We saw this with Toyota. They had a supplier shut down 14 of their plants. Do you think that supplier gets future business? right? They can't eliminate them immediately because they need to kind of get those parts. They come out of tools and everything else. But when they make the next model year of their part and they're having those meetings over which supplier to pick, do you really think they don't take it into account during those discussions that you were responsible for causing them to lose millions, hundreds of millions of dollars? Absolutely they do. So that damage can show up a year or 2 years or 3 years down the road and really take you out of the game. So the only way to prevent that isn't to try and hide the fact that you've been breached. You know, as you mentioned earlier, there's underreporting, but I don't believe in that as a strategy. I believe that this is where proactive measures such as threat monitoring, and we've got slides on those with IDS, IPS, all those things are your best bet. The best defense you can have is to get active, get engaged, start doing things. Eat the elephant one bite at a time.
All right, so now we're going to take a look at just the back half of our session today, John. And this one here is taking a look at a proactive stance versus a reactive stance. And this one here is so important for me, John, because number one, in a reactive stance, this one here is basically you have a threat monitoring solution, and you're basically looking at this as an armchair quarterback, and you're just waiting for alerts and just completely reactive. And so inside of that model, being reactive like that, I find that is a very, very dangerous place to be today, because of the fact that you may not be fast enough getting to those alerts as they pop up in the console to actually deal with these. Most of these threat intelligent tools that are out there, most of these threat monitoring tools are going to provide a comprehensive list of what are called recommended actions that the tools are seeing in your infrastructure. So for example, let's say that from a Microsoft security perspective, let's say that you build a new server. And when you build that new server, you're basically just popping in the ISO and you're building what's called a next finish build of Windows, okay? And like when you know what, John, when I attend these sessions, I'm always looking for little gold nuggets. So everyone just listen up real close here for a sec, because this is going to be a really important gold nugget for you, okay? When you build Windows, and I call it the next finished build of Windows, John, you're basically building a home edition version of Windows with none of those security features turned on. Can you secure Windows? Absolutely, you can secure Windows. But as a company, Microsoft has made a living over all of the years in my IT career by making the operating system usable versus secure out of box, okay? And so even in your cloud tenants, let's say that hypothetically speaking, John, you go and you're going to go build yourself a new infrastructure as a service VM. It's very easy to do in the cloud portal. Very easy, next, and you have yourself a VM running up there. Let's say that that happens to be a copy of Server 2019 or 2022 or the latest flagship 2025. In the initial builds of that, those aren't hardened by default. So even Microsoft has identified this as a challenge. And so now even those cloud-based builds, they give you options to having pre-hardened images that you roll out. And so I like to say, don't be a victim of next finish. And also remember that the measures of security that you have out of box, if you are not hardening things, is like you're running home edition of Windows in your enterprise. Can we secure this, John? I always get asked this question. Yes, there's great organizations that are out there that help with this. For example, the Center for Internet Security, they provide hardening baselines and hardening templates for us that we can take a system from a next finish to a known hardened state, different levels, level 1, level 2. And so with that, what ends up happening, John, is I'll use the CIS for Server 2022 as an example. There are over 360 configuration changes to be made in there to get yourself compliant to a level 1 off of a next finish. So guess what all of those 360 settings are going to do for you? They are going to put you into a proactive stance, protecting you against threat actors instead of waiting for them to come into your infrastructure. Don't wait until you actually get hit by a cyber attack to start hardening your infrastructure. This is something that you can do today. Just remember, everyone, and I'll repeat myself, we've got about 5 to 7 minutes left in this session. The systems that you build out of box, next finish, are not fully hardened by default. It is up to you as IT pros and security professionals to lock those things down. The good news is there's great tools that are out there like the Center for Internet Security help with that, but that's my little proactive reactive stance here, John. The proactive for me is go ahead and get projects in place where you're hardening those systems to try to prevent those types of attacks. And you know what? Maybe if the city of Cleveland had that in place, then, maybe they could have prevented this week-long downtime that they're still suffering from today. And I'm just speaking hypothetically. I have no idea what's going on in their infrastructure. And in all honesty, I wish that on nobody to have to go through a cyber event like that. So I'll hand this over to you, John. What do you think? We've got about 6 minutes left.
Well, you made some really good points on there, but I want to make sure that we get a chance to get to Paul's question about how well equipped are modern threat monitoring solutions for detecting AI-powered or enhanced threats. And the good news, Paul, is that they're very well equipped. So things like Copilot for Security, they're quite evolved, and they allow you to put AI into play to help you do things like hunt and interpret large volumes of data very quickly without having massive resources. So this also helps with what we talked about earlier with how do SMBs get into this and that sort of thing. So companies are developing some very powerful AI threat detection tools, and I'm a big fan of them. Unfortunately, there are players entering the market that say they have these great AI-powered tools, and they're really just marketing fluff. So you really do have to do your due diligence and understand what you're getting and that sort of thing. So there's your 2-second answer to that one, Paul. I hope that helps. And Dave, so, let's talk about quickly the top 3 challenges in threat monitoring system, the lack of visibility, right? You mentioned the Active Directory that has been in place for 25 years that, nobody really understands the whole thing about. It creates a lack of visibility. We have data overload. There's just so much coming in. It's almost like white noise. How do we interpret it? That's where things like Copilot for Security come in, those AI-powered tools that help analyze and summarize that data quickly. And then skill shortage. This is a huge one, Dave, and I know you have lots of great thoughts on this, so I'll turn it over to you to close it out. And that is that as IT pros, we have to absolutely double down on our personal investment in staying skilled up, staying operationally effective. And Dave, with that thought, I'm going to throw it back at you.
Oh, what a great segue here, John. And so here's the deal. Here's the real deal, everyone listening on our webinar today, is you can put the best monitoring solutions in place. But if inherently and fundamentally you don't understand the systems that you are actually monitoring, like, for example, I take the newest member of our team and plunk them in front of the console and say, watch this. If alerts come up, then do something. Great. What if this person doesn't even understand what that alert means? oh, brute force attack happening right now. What if they don't even understand what a brute force attack is and the attack surface that it's coming in from? It's great that you have the monitoring, but how do you defend against that? You need to make sure that you're putting the skilled resources in the seats behind those consoles to take most effective use of them. Because when you are under attack, and I've seen this time and time again, John, where unfortunately the individuals were put into those roles without having the fundamental knowledge required to actually fully, defend against this and or understand the severity of what some of these incidences are looking at. And especially from a cybersecurity standpoint, it's hot right now. Everybody wants to be in cybersecurity for their jobs and roles because, you get a bump in pay and lots of things. But when it's the time when you're under attack right now, I want the level 5 of 5 resource that understands that infrastructure, that can make the snap decisions right now, that can say, listen, this is bad. We need to take and follow the following steps to get out of this. We need to engage with higher level resources. We need to do all of this, all right? And so when we take a look at this, this is something that is absolutely huge for us when we take a look at the actual best benefits and value out of these threat monitoring systems. And this is where that skill shortage comes in. The good news is it's fixable, but please understand that those resources that you have in your infrastructure, and I see this right now, there's a lot of turnover in a lot of companies. That loss of intellectual property that you're potentially having in there is huge, right? And so if you lose all that intellectual property as to how that infrastructure was glued together, you're going to have a really hard time defending against that, right? And so, John, I'll hand that back to you. There's time for one more question here. We'll take Kevin's last question, and then we're going to wrap this up. But you got to be quick with it, okay, John? John, are you still there, or did I lose you?
I'm here, Dave. Sorry about that. Kevin, really liked your point. He said that's such a great point. Above and beyond sites such as Gartner and Forrester, similar reviewing sites, paid for by those being reviewed, how do you see through the sales pitch to make sure you are choosing the most effective security platforms? And my tips on this are, one, your network comes into play again. So do what you're doing. Ask, other people, what are they using and why do they feel it's valid and that sort of thing. For instance, I mentioned Copilot for Security. I was involved with it early in its development and still in today, and I'm very happy with that product. The second tip is you really need to do your best to get a demo that allows you to install it and look at it from your perspective. So in your tenant or in your infrastructure, so that you can see how effective it is at looking at the things inside your own personal network. And so I'll leave you with kind of those two broad tips, and I'll throw it back to Gladys. Gladys, thank you so much for bringing us in today.
Thank you both for another terrific presentation. And folks, Dave and John's slides will be available to you along with the replay, so you can double down on what they said, take notes, everything else. Thanks again, Dave and John, and everyone else. Stay tuned. We're going to be back in a minute or two to to get into our second session of the day, titled Top Threat Monitoring Implementation Strategies.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I'm David Rammel, editor of Virtualization and Cloud Review, here to moderate the second session of our summit, titled Top Threat Monitoring Implementation Strategies, sponsored by ControlUp, Druva, and Rubrik. Our speaker for this session is Greg Schultz, a founder and senior advisor at Server Storage IO, an independent IT advisory, consultancy, and creative services firm. As a Microsoft MVP in cloud data center management and a 10-time VMware V expert, He brings a diverse background to his work as a consulting analyst with a real-world perspective across applications, data infrastructures, hardware, software, and clouds. He's also the author of several books. Greg, it's great to have you here. Please take it away.
Great. Thanks, David. Hello and welcome, everybody, to today's discussion, Top Threat Monitoring Implementation Strategies. I am Greg Schultz of Storage.io, and let's get started. So we're going to pick up from where the first session left off, and here's our outline. Here's what we're going to be covering today. What are your threat monitoring objectives? What and where to monitor the threats? How to monitor the threats and from where. You've got different options, especially being in SMB types environments, but also applicable to enterprises on where you do the monitoring from, as well as what you're monitoring. And then there's another aspect that we're going to touch on is what to do with those threat monitoring results. And of course, we'll touch on some best practices and tips and your discussions, your Q&As as we go along from this conversation here. All right. So let's just jump right into it. Let's get right to business here, which is don't be scared. Be prepared, i.e., while you're here today, while you're watching this or catching the replay of it, is that know what the threats are. And we heard this in the previous session a little bit, is that you have to understand and know what are the threats and what's applicable and what is your environment, what's normal, what's abnormal, but that you've got different things that can be done then. Is that a part of that monitoring, which ties back to having that strategy, is that threats are detected, they're defended against, they're deflected, but you can also diagnose, make adjustments. But in addition to knowing what those threats are, part of it is also understanding what are the potential impacts. Are they something that could cause a complete loss of access to your systems, your apps, your data, compromise your organization, or could it be a partial loss, partial destruction, a denial of a service attack? What's being compromised or stolen or exposed? So it's understanding the threats, their impacts, and then also what are your options for doing all that. And underlying all of this is having that information, having that insight, having that awareness to be able to pick up the data on what you're detecting and diagnosing and deducing and to take action on that. So knowing the threats, detecting, leveraging automation, leveraging intelligence, leveraging AI for that matter, but being able to take action, having a plan, being able to do remediation, keep things current, are all part of the things that go into consideration. All right, so with that in mind, let's look at the big picture. The big pictures of what are your threat monitoring objectives, okay? What does your strategy implementation need to encompass? So in other words, we're talking about threat monitoring implementation strategies. Okay, we've got the different ways of monitoring, but what is it that you're trying to accomplish? What are you looking to address? What are your success objectives, your outcomes, your measurements? In other words, to be able to justify and implement a strategy, what is it that you need to measure, to report back, to show back to management or whomever that, hey, this investment is paying for itself or it's protecting the organization? And here are the metrics. Here's how you're going to derive that. What are your business demands, the drivers, the requirements? In the earlier session, we heard a lot of the different issues, the threats, the challenges, their different impacts. So what are those that are applicable to your organization that are helping to be the drivers for doing something, for taking that approach for an implementation? What are your technology tools, your staffing, as well as your experiences? Do you have skilled, experienced staff, or are you bringing new members on? How can you leverage that? What do you need to do to supplement that as part of an implementation strategy? But there's also what your abilities are, what your resources are, what your assets, your tools, technology. But then there's the other side of, are they constraints? So it's a balancing act of you've got resources, you've got skill sets, but what are your constraints, if any? Okay, so then this all comes down to what is your focus and what is your skill. Is it to look at something that's a point solution, a particular area? Are you looking at just the network? Are you looking at just security? Are you looking at things a little bit more holistic? Are you looking at it from a component, from a particular app, from a particular workload, a particular service, or more up and down full stack as well as horizontally from on-prem to edge to core to cloud to hybrid? And what are those different locations that you need to monitor? Locations being different places, but also different elevations in the stack, from higher level apps to middle databases, platforms as services, to lower level information data infrastructure resources. So what groups, what parties, teams, stakeholders, in other words, other people are or should be involved? Is this just a individual focus area, say for security or for networking or compliance, or is this more holistic? Is one particular group taking the lead on this with management's buy-in, management support, and then having virtual team members that are a part of a virtual collective team that are all working on this together? And where this comes in also is this a tactical or reactive, quick short-term fix because something happened or you're seeing signs of something happening? Or is this part of a longer, larger-term strategic view? In other words, part of a larger holistic strategy that, again, ties in different players, different focus, different technology domains, skill sets, expertise. Then is there an existing or in progress overall overarching IT and data infrastructure monitoring strategy that this is a part of? Or is this that first step? Is this that first point of doing something? All right, so a lot of things there in the big picture, but from there, let's move on and take a look at some other aspects here. Okay, so again, we're getting to the threat monitoring implementation strategies, and that is very, very tied to understanding the threat, understanding what we're protecting, what we need to implement to support. And over there on the left, we're not going to dwell on these, but those are the different incidents. You heard a lot about these, the things that can happen in the earlier session, but also the key point here is understanding what is applicable to your environment, what's the likely risk, and the different impacts. Over there on the right, these are from the different components, the different pieces, putting this puzzle together. Again, it's looking more holistically. We're looking at holistically, if we look horizontally, across from edge to on-prem to core to hybrid public cloud, multi-cloud. But we're also looking over there on the right vertically, up and down the different layers, the different focus areas that encompass these different people. There's technology and tools, people, education, awareness, data protection, the alerts, the dashboards, policies, compliance regulations, a lot of different things that all get put together to help derive ultimately, which is going to be, how are you going to implement a strategy or strategies to have that threat monitoring taken care of? All right, so building off that previous slide, we see a couple of different things here, which is our main focus is on that implementation strategies. In other words, we've heard about the need for monitoring, different monitoring strategies per se, the outcomes, the focus, things like that. You know, there's more coming up on the specific tools and technologies, things like that. But what we're going to focus on is what to monitor, when, where, how, with what, the policies, we've touched on the stakeholders, as well as using those results and where to manage from. If you're all in one environment, if you're all in the cloud, well, probably going to monitor from the cloud, but what are some other options? If you're hybrid where you've got core, edge, on-prem, cloud, you're going to take a hybrid approach. Or you're going to monitor it all from on-prem or all from on-cloud. A lot of different options there. All right, so we've looked at what are your threat monitoring objectives. Now let's take a closer look at what and where to monitor those different threats from. Where this ties back to is understanding the environment, but we know we've got different attacks. We know we've got different attackers. They could be external, but they could also be internal. They could be people. They could be software-defined bots. They could be AI-generated tools that are attacking your organization, trying to get somebody to do something. These threats could be people impersonating other people, people attacking your people to open up a attack area. So we've got all these different areas that are points of vulnerability where attacks can occur that we need to monitor, that we need to know and detect what's going on. And in the previous session, we also heard about this deluge of data. There's just large amounts of data that's coming in, and how do we not only monitor it, but also how can we start to sift through that and adjust that signal-to-noise ratio so that we can start to filter out and find that diamond in the rough, that needle in the haystack, so to speak, and figure out, okay, yeah, these are known. We have tools that already know how to handle these. This looks like a new attack. This looks like something different. We need to adjust the different profiles. But this sets the stage, this particular slide, where we're going to jump forward and just revisit real quickly here that, okay, so we need this threat monitoring implementation, and we've got the different strategies. Well, part of that is having those policies, having that visibility, having that insight, having that situational awareness up and down that stack, i.e., across those vertical layers, but also horizontally, whether you're just one location or you're multiple locations, whether you're cloud, hybrid. We also look at these different points of view, which is the SaaS, the resources, the apps, the various functionality, as well as management tools, your PaaS layer, your databases, repositories, your development tools, as well as the IaaS resources, the servers, the storage, the networking, all those different things. So part of your implementation strategy goes back to that outcome. What is it that you're looking to do? What is that focus and scope that we talked about a little bit ago? Where does that fit? What does that encompass? How do you factor all those in for making informed decisions? All right, so let's go a little further. What and where to monitor the threat? So what we're going to monitor and where, i.e. devices, fixed devices that are just sitting in an office somewhere, mobile devices, laptops, tablets, smartphones, things that are portable, things that are physical, things that are virtual, i.e. virtual desktop, virtual machines, as well as IoT. The endpoints, and again, the what are those devices, which includes endpoints, network devices, apps, servers, services. In other words, a third-party service provider, maybe a Salesforce or M365, among many, many others. But also different services, including storage capabilities. These can be on-prem, the core, the edge, work from home, cloud, SaaS and service providers. So again, we're talking about what to monitor and where those things we're going to monitor, where are they? We're monitoring identity and access management services, authorizations, authentication, as well as policies, policy implementations, policy changes, as well as overall changes to the environment. Are we monitoring when new apps are deployed? We've seen recently where there's been disruptions because there's something tied to an app being rolled out. Maybe it results in a disruption, lack of service, maybe enabling an attack. So it's being aware that, oh yeah, something happened, great. What's changed in the environment? Were we attacked? Was it something internal intentionally? Was it something internal accidentally? Having that visibility, having that insight, or the ability to quickly find that out. So this also ties into monitoring the internal IT staff as well as your other workers, clients, partners, service providers in terms of what are they accessing, what are they authorized and authenticated to access, and is that normal or abnormal? Communications and collaborations, monitoring emails, text messages, direct messages, file sharing and other collaborative type activity. Access to logs. Who has access to different logs, traces, dumps, as well as backup data and your catalogs and logs. We've seen where some different attacks have actually been accomplished by an attacker gaining access to logs or dumps, traces, and be able to capture and get information about the environment and then go on to do additional attacks. So those are all different things, which we also need to remember to don't forget about monitoring your monitoring and event notification system. Just like it's important to back up and protect your backup data protection infrastructure tools, settings, and software, we also want to make sure that the tools, the technology, the policies that are being implemented as part of a strategy, that they themselves are protected so that they don't become compromised. All right, moving on. So part of the what and where to monitor is being able to ask and answer questions such as, do you or your monitoring system, solution, or service know where your local and remote devices are and if they're up to date? Do they have the most recent patches? Are they vulnerable? What users are authenticated for access to which apps, services, data? What is normal versus abnormal behaviors, which can also include incidents or activities? This is, again, knowing your workload, knowing your environment, knowing the apps, knowing what's normal on a Monday morning versus abnormal, different things like that. But also geolocation consideration. So part of your implementation strategy needs to address geolocation considerations. For example, I'm here in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area, and someone an hour from now logs in, and it looks like I, Greg Schultz, just logged in and am accessing my resources, but I'm in Tokyo, Japan. Oh, wait a minute. That's pretty difficult to get from Minneapolis to Tokyo, Japan in an hour, even with teleporting, okay? But that's an example of a geolocation consideration. You know what? The banks, the credit card companies, they do this with their fraud detection. They see that, okay, I just used my credit card in the Minneapolis area. Now my credit card is being used in Tokyo. That's a potential red flag, if not a red flag, of something. Well, that same applies with your different information systems, your apps, things that you need to monitor and look out for. All right. Do you know, or does your system know, when somebody is onboarded, offboarded, or their accesses have been changed, that they've been revoked or that they've been upgraded? What about emerging threat or attack profiles that are new or unknown to your organization? Is this a threat? Is it external, or is it coming internal, and is it accidental, or is it intentional? Then is it real, or is it a test? Are you being probed? Are you being probed by attackers to look for vulnerabilities, or are you being probed, tested by a red, blue, or a purple team that's actually checking to see what vulnerabilities exist in your organization? But be able to detect and determine that. Now, not all of this is done by one simple magic tool. There's no big red easy buttons, but there are solutions that will get you close to this, that when you combine those together with policies, practices, experiences, knowledge, that collectively they start to work and to be able to address questions like these. And again, having that historical reference to look back at past activity, incidents, insights, that's part of leveraging that knowledge, the experience of people, but also using tools that are able to go out and look at logs, go out and look at the past and say, yeah, you know what, we have seen this before, this was the outcome, or you know what, we've seen this pattern, it's something that happens once a month, whatever that happens to be. And that ties into what we're going to talk a little bit about what to do with the data that you capture. Okay, so again, having that visibility into that whole stack, also having that overall health, security, and data protection. What is the posture? Is it in good health? All right. So let's look at the big picture monitoring. And that big picture looks something along these lines here, is that this is pretty generic, but we've got a lot of different pieces. We've got over in that lower left, branch offices, up in the upper left, we've got main offices, on-prem, we've got apps at both. We've got a public cloud there where we've got IT staff that's maybe working, accessing stuff at the headquarters, but also accessing stuff in the cloud. We also have a secondary cloud that's maybe being used for some apps, or maybe it's a service provider. But when you look at this, you could scale this up, you could scale it down to whatever fits your environment. Some of these might apply, some don't. But there's different points that we can look at in terms of being able to, what are we going to monitor, what are we going to manage, and where are we going to do that from? And there's a couple of different pieces here. For example, here's a firewall. Well, we want to keep a track on that. We got another firewall. We've got remote access. We've got access maybe to dumps and telemetry, something we talked about. We've got apps that are running in the cloud. We've got the different infrastructure layers. How are all these different points being looked at? How are they being monitored? You have one tool, one technology that's monitoring the cloud, another one monitoring the branch, another one monitoring the headquarters, another one monitoring your monitoring service. That's part of a strategy is, do all these roll into a data plane, into a control plane, into a management plane? Those all become parts of your strategy. But let's move on from this one and look at another scenario. Okay, this is looking at the picture a little bit differently, which is all those red dots are potential attack vectors, attack surfaces, points that can be attack vulnerabilities, okay? Likewise, all those little green plus signs are locations of where monitoring should be done and also action can be taken. So as we see there's a lot going on in the screen. You can scale this down, you can scale it up in different points, but you can see where those vulnerabilities are. Those are also where we want to be monitoring, detecting, and collecting information, but also leveraging automation as part of defending those different layers. Okay, here's another layer, or another approach, and in this one, we're looking at, say, a DevOps, a test deployment and production, a cloud native sort of approach, if you like. So again, where are we looking at points of what's being turned over, what's being developed, what's being put in production, who has access? Who has access to the app code, to the repositories? What about when build, integrates, and testing is being done? What about changing, that we're able to say, yeah, here, a push was done, it's been deployed, and it's affected particular modules. And then being able to look at the different components, at the different services, and be able to detect things have changed, here's the activity going on, everything looks to be running well. But what it really comes down to is being able to have a solution. Your strategy looks at these various points of interest, the various scope, the various focus, the platforms, the tools, but also how interfaces with other monitoring and other alert detection tools are being fed up to your dashboard. So if, for example, you're running a Kubernetes type environment, a serverless type environment, how are those different tools reporting information up to your dashboards, to your tools, or to a more composite monitoring capability? So those are some things to keep in mind. Let's look at another scenario here. Threat monitoring implementation. Again, these are what to monitor and where to monitor them. Not where to monitor them from. We're getting towards that. But some other things. Again, a cloud native, serverless container, Kubernetes type environment are that you have the different things to monitor. The overall, what's going on with the clusters, what are going on with the pods, the containers, the different nodes, the different apps that are being deployed. And again, similar to that previous slide, different points of focus, scope, platform, tools. How are those different tools, those different components monitoring things and then sending that information, feeding that information back to a more holistic or overlay monitoring capability? Or is it taking everything and just keeping it contained? So these are all things part of considerations. Okay, so another scenario here. This is a simplified version of what I showed you a few slides back. In other words, where we have infrastructure resources, whether they're physical or virtual, storage, networks, servers, operating systems, hypervisors, virtual machines, containers. Having that visibility into those, but also the apps that are running on those, the different workloads. We see the different resources over there on the left. We see different networking endpoints, gateways, private access and identity, identity including, for example, Microsoft Intro if you're working on Azure. But then all the different other capabilities like access to cloud storage, things like that. So in other words, having that implementation strategy that looks at what's the health, what are the policies that are in place, are they being enforced, what are the access control, what are the alerts, are these alerts normal, or did you just trigger a whole slew of alerts by rolling out a new policy change? Well, that's part of having that situational awareness, being able to review your IAM and policies, anomaly detection, protecting the logs of being able to analyze those and monitoring those different endpoints. And doing this, some of the different tools, which will be expanded on, I believe, in the next session, but tools like having advisors, assistants, analyzers that are running on the different clouds, the different services, but that can also be running on-prem. And some of these tools can run on the cloud, but also look back in to your on-prem or even your edge environment to be able to collect information, analyze it, what's your health, what's your security, what's your monitoring posture, is everything good, how are things? But having things like advisors, assistants like co-pilots and things like that. But the key is having that visibility, having that insight, having that situational awareness. A little bit ago I touched on services. Well, here's an example of monitoring a service. And in this case, looking at a desktop, a VDI, a virtual desktop, a Microsoft 365, M365, or a SaaS type environment where you've got particular workloads running on this service, for example, desktops, that are using different tools, that are doing different things. So what we're looking for is have that visibility into this environment and be able to look at how the resources are being used, looking at what's normal, what's abnormal, being able to detect, is there nefarious access trying to take place, somebody trying to log in to a particular tenant or into a particular resource that maybe is not authenticated. Do we have a geolocation issue where somebody is accessing a resource that they're either not allowed to because of the location, or that somebody just teleported and time jumped for some reason, okay? So we're looking at different things like that. We're looking at the logs, looking at the access policies, we're monitoring, we're setting up advisors, assistants to help gain that visibility of what's normal, what's abnormal, learning from that, collecting information to help defend in real time, deflect attacks, but also to be able to go back and do postmortems, figure out what happened, why did it happen, where was that vulnerability, doing those root cause types analysis. All right, so we've talked about the what are your threats, the objectives, we've talked about what and where to monitor the threats. Let's shift gears here a little bit and take a look at how to monitor the threats and from where. So we've talked about that there are the different threats, there are these different devices, these different things, these devices, these entities, these apps that are in different locations. So now let's take a look at how to monitor those threats and where. Again, these all play in to that strategy. So looking at this now, there's different tools, different technologies, and different services that have various centricities in terms of what their scope of focus. In other words, are you focused on the network, on security, service manager, servers, storage, apps, third-party apps? What's your focus? Are your tools based on do-it-yourself, in-house developed, or open source provided tools and scripts that somebody has stitched together, composed them, composited, defined them, essentially creating your monitoring environment, okay? The question there then is, how is that sustainable? How is that supportable over long term? Is that dependent on particular knowledge set that is possessed by maybe an individual or maybe a small group of people? What happens when they leave or they move on? What happens to that knowledge? Can that knowledge be captured and put into documents or put into a wiki or some sort of repository that you've captured that domain knowledge, that skill set, that expertise, such that people can move between teams or move within the organization or when they move on, as of being opposed with this monitoring entity that now has become technical debt that you have to keep carrying and feeding instead of focusing on the business. So again, we're coming back to that centricity and scope of different vendors, of different services, of different platforms. Where do they fit in? Third-party cross-platform tools that maybe can span across a lot of different environments, but do they span up and down the different layers and focus areas? You've got tools that maybe can go up and down and can go deep into an environment on a vertical basis, but can they work horizontally across different platforms, different tools? All things to factor in as a part of how to monitor and from where. We're seeing now where you can manage from on-prem and look at your edge, look at your different clouds, have your different dashboards, different tools that roll up to the dashboards or overlay tools. But we also have solutions where from a given cloud. So for example, from Azure, you have the ability with things like Azure Arc that you can look at your Azure environment, but also look at service providers, but also reach back in and be able to monitor, manage, and even do configuration of resources that are at your on-prem or your edge type environment. So these start to factor in how to monitor the threats, but where. You've got these different capabilities. They all tie back to what are your objectives, how do you want to go about managing. There's also this notion of having that hybrid, that instead of relying on one single dashboard that you have, more of a best-of-breed approach, but it's more of a hybrid where you're leveraging specificity to look at specific focus areas, but getting that insight, getting the information that then being able to be fed and distributed and acted upon by other entities, by other sorts of tools. And that's where the automation comes into play. You know, traditional security-related network protection, automation, MDR, assistants, analyzers, advisors that can help defend, help deflect, leverage automation, add new policies to allow your workers to do more. But what it's also allowing is to run health checks on your environment to see, you know, how is your security posture? How is your networking posture? How is your overall environment? What is its overall health? Is it in good shape? Does it need improvement? Here are some additional things to do. This is where we also start to segue into where does AI play in? Well, AI plays as a threat. Attackers are using AI to attack your organization for writing the scripts that they can call and use to spoof somebody into access, to giving you a fake website to click on. They're using these. So those are on there. But what can you do? Well, you could use like the co-pilots, the generative AI for assistance. In other words, similar to how you might have used something like a Cortana or a search in the past. How do you do this? What is normal? But where those tools are being able to look at different information, look at historical information and trends, and where you can type in a question like, is this abnormal behavior for this environment, for these such situations? And hopefully the tool comes back and says, this might be abnormal because of this. So those tools are getting better. Just keep in mind that with those AI tools, it's garbage in, garbage out. Garbage in data, garbage in inferencing, or garbage in input can result in garbage responses out, where if you've ever played with ChatGPT or other tools, you can vary the outcome based on what you provide as the input. Some of it can be rather entertaining, but when it comes to strategy and monitoring and protection, we want to be serious about that. So there are good tools that can help out with a lot of routine things that takes the pressure off your skilled staff, your other tools to do other things, be more effective. All right. So what are some other aspects? Again, we're coming back to this slide that I showed you a little bit ago. Again, we see the red attack points, the points of interest. And again, those green are where we want to be monitoring, detecting, and have different tools, different components that are able to take action at a firewall. That, yeah, the firewall detected something, it took action, but it also triggered an alert, it triggered a feed back to a more holistic or another monitoring tool that says, yeah, we're getting these alerts out at the firewall. So far, the firewall is holding up. It's doing its job. But we're starting to see these new things that are popping up. Feed that back to another system that collects the data, stores it, that can then be analyzed, where then somebody can go back and run analytics on it and say, yeah, we are spotting a new trend here. We do need to update a policy. We need to put a new policy in place. We need to put a new rule in, whatever that happens to be. Again, having that insight, having that dashboard, but having it filtered out so you just don't have all these alerts and all these alarms distracting you. That's the key, is leveraging the automation, the different tools to handle all those things that it can. So what you are seeing, or the person that's responsible, that they're seeing they're adjusting that signal to noise ratio. They're seeing where the more serious issues are, as opposed to having to respond to every little small thing. Okay, so those are all some things that factor in as a part of how to monitor the different threats and from where. All right, so that takes us up to what to do with the threat monitoring results. Well, one is if we get something, a threat monitored, that we should get an alert. Well, yeah, we should get an alert, or something should get an alert. It always doesn't have to be a particular person, depending on that severity. So if you're using, like, say, MDR software, manage, detect, react, things like that, it's being updated over time. Hopefully it's learning over time based on what it's seeing, but that hopefully the obvious is that you've leveraged that insight, you've got situational awareness, real time, but also your different system solutions, platforms, the tools are taking care of things, so important things are bubbling up to where they need to be seen, routine things are being analyzed, but that those routine things that are being handled automatically, that there's also information being fed back that says, yeah, our manage, detect, react, or MDR, or other automation tools saw 1,000 incidents yesterday, and they were able to automatically resolve 950, 50 of which got bumped up and were analyzed, of which 2 were severe, okay? That's important, because that ties back to being able to show management, show others that, yeah, these solutions are working. They're not just sitting out there and we're paying subscriptions or paying for them. These tools are working to protect your environment, and here is just a sampling of what they're doing, okay? So that's why we want to have this monitoring, in some cases monitoring the monitoring, to get those metrics, put them in a repository for analytics, but also that show back. So hopefully the obvious, that you've got the alerts, the notification, automatic detection and action, real-time analytics and reviews, but also applying updates to event triggers and policies. But possibly some things that not so obvious is the post-incident analytics, the forensics, the post-mortems. Instead of looking on who the blame is going to be put on, it's figure out what happened, how to prevent it, how to fix it, what needs to change, policies, procedures, tools, technologies. Those deeper analytics are what helps to drive future policy. That should be policy, not police. But let's think of it that way, is to police the policies so that they're up to date. They're there to protect, preserve, and serve your environment. To have that identity that, here, we need to do remediation. We need to update these laptops. We need to update these endpoints. We need to update these apps. We need to update our roles, responsibilities, but also to support the education, training of staff, workers, along with tools to be able to feed the machine learning and deep learning AI type tools so that they can learn to be able to help automatically detect and deter attackers, but also to help support those assistants. And that also ties into that change monitoring, that, hey, yeah, something happened, but, oh, yeah, by the way, that's forgot. We did a turnover yesterday where the apps were updated. Okay, let's go back real quick and see if that's the problem or if there was something else going on. So again, it's having that awareness, that visibility, leveraging the automation where possible, but leveraging the automation to offload your skilled knowledge workers so that they can focus on the exceptions, the abnormal, let the tools handle the things that are more known. So again, what to do with those threat monitoring results real quickly here. Over on that left is to be able to deflect and to deter, diagnose, protect against these different threats, but also feed the information back for that learning, to be able to feed the tools so that they become smarter, updating policies, updating the automation, gaining that visibility, having those different, making sure that all the different layers are protected across those different locations. All right, so let's take a look here at some best practices here, and then we're going to segue into a Q&A. All right, so with that having been said, what are some best practices and tips for implementation strategies? Well, establish and maintain that continual situational awareness via monitoring. I like to say that, particularly with cloud, but also with on-prem, is that if you don't have timely, real, valid data, okay, that it's good data, it's not bad data, it's good data, good telemetry, good information, you're flying blind, and your instruments are only as good as the data they are getting, okay? So it's important to have that awareness, that event and activity logging, that you're collecting that, you're storing that information, that it's secured, so that you can run analytics, you can detect anomalies, but go back and look and see what's normal, what's abnormal, build your different profiles, feed the automated tools so that they can do their learning, enable that threat monitoring information flow amongst different stakeholders. The different stakeholders, the different technology domains may have different tools that they might be using to be able to implement their part of an implementation strategy. So it's important that the different alerts, the different notifications are being fed to those different stakeholders so that they have that information, they can do what they need to do with it. Of course, the ultimate is have that one repository, that one tool, that one dashboard that everybody is working off of, but then we come back to reality. There are different tools, different domains, different specialties, so that information needs to flow across horizontally, across the different sites, places, but also up and down vertically. So it's monitoring at those different layers, from the components to the apps, the systems, and leveraging that tools for smart tool training as well as remediation, and utilizing that automation, the wizards, to look at your environment. What is the health of your current environment? What is the posture, that current status? Publish to the stakeholders and others, interested parties, metrics that matter, that justify, that show, yes, these tools are working. These implementation strategies are working because we've detected this number of incidents, we've deflected this, we've been able to isolate these, we've been able to go back and find out this, we've been able to do policy updates. Having that information is be able to create your report card, more or less, of what's going on, how effective is your implementation strategy. So having that continuous review of your policies, your best practices, and who's responsible for the different tools and focus areas. But again, also monitor your monitoring, monitor your security, your data protection, and that threat detection for improvement, but also for signs that maybe there's a weakness in the posture and that status, that there's room for improvement. Okay, so with that, let's recap for now. Everything and everyone is a threat risk, from internal to external. Understand your different threat risks, your different attack surfaces, and their impact. How scalable is your detection monitoring? Where is it focused, and can it scale? Are you going to monitor it from the cloud, from on-prem, from all points in between? What is your desired end state, or what's your next iteration going to be as part of monitoring threats and how you're going to implement that? So working with partners, vendors, service providers. All right, where to learn more? There's my blog, my link to my books. I'm on Twitter, or X. There's my email if you want to chat afterwards. But hey, David, with all that, do we got some time for some Q&A?
We certainly do. Great stuff, Greg. And we'll get to those questions. I'd like to remind the audience that we can take questions up until about short break before the next session. So please send them on in now. And let's get to the questions in the Q&A console. We'll just take them first come, first serve, Greg, if you're following around. So I'll be reading from the bottom up.
Okay.
The first question reads, is threat monitoring just a security focus? What about networking and other areas?
Yeah, so I mean, this comes back to what we talked about is what is that scope, what is that focus? If you're coming at this from security, okay, great, then your focus is going to be on security, but it needs to reach out, touch, and embrace and include other technology domains, other focus areas, including networking, the apps, the servers, and so forth. Likewise, if you're coming at this from, say, a networking perspective, it needs to reach more than just the traditional security. It needs to reach out and include, have that domain expertise of other areas.
All right. Next question reads, what are some tips for helping to justify investing in threat monitoring?
Yeah, great one. We touched on that just towards the end there, but being able to report back, show back that what is happening. In other words, that you had 1,000 attacks yesterday, or there were 1,000 incidents yesterday, and of those, 500 of those were attacks, and of those 500, 498 were handled automatically, 2 required intervention, and here's the result of those. Of the other 500, they were a mixture of different sorts of things that then you're able to report back, show back, have that dashboard that you can see that, yeah, this is what we're detecting, this is what's happening, here are the steps that are being taken, and this can be done proactively as part of your research, your preparation, your proof of concept for doing something is to identify, yeah, this is what's happening, this is how we're having to spend people time. But then after deployment that you're able to say, yeah, here's what's happening. We're seeing an increase of activity, which should be normal, but we're seeing a decrease in the amount of time per person that's being required to resolve those. But, oh, by the way, what the people are interfacing, interacting with are taking more time because they are becoming more complex. So, yeah, you could say we're doing more with less, but it's not just about eliminating headcount. It's about making everything and everybody more effective in your environment, what it's there for, to be productive.
Okay. And a quick reminder to the audience, please send in any questions you have because Greg lives and breathes this stuff. So this is a great opportunity for someone to get some expert one-on-one discourse. And let's move along to the next question. It reads, what role does AI such as generative ChatGPT, copilots play or enable with threat monitoring?
Yeah, another good one, David, is that it's a two-part. On the one hand, these tools, these technologies are being used by the attackers to create new scripts that they're able to read off of when they're calling you or sending you an email trying to get you to do something. They have become very, very sophisticated, even generating bogus websites for you to go click on and get compromised. So they're using those tools to refine their attacks. That's the one side to it. So we need to have tools, and this is where AI in general, okay, and AI in general is life beyond generative AI, which is the machine learning, the detection, the automation, that aspect to it. Those are getting better. They're becoming more robust. But where do the things like the generative, i.e. ChatGPTs, the Copilot assistants, so they're there to help you sift through information, to answer questions, hopefully that aren't just generic questions that are searching logs or repository websites to say, how do I implement a GPO policy? Well, yeah, it'll tell you that, it'll give you the steps, but it should also be that you can ask questions querying, hey, we're seeing this sort of activity on this date with these scenarios. How does this line up with normality, or is this something new?